The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks of downtown as Officer James Anderson finished another exhausting shift. His shoulders ached from the weight of responsibility he carried, not just from his badge, but from the countless faces he encountered each day in this struggling neighborhood. The early autumn wind whistled through the ancient buildings, carrying with it the whispers of countless untold stories. That's when he first noticed the small dog following him. The creature maintained a careful distance, but its eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed intently on James. It was a scruffy little thing, its fur matted and dirty, but there was an intelligence in those eyes that made James pause. He tried to shoo it away at first, believing it to be just another stray seeking scraps, but the puppy persisted, maintaining that same measured distance. Something about its behavior seemed deliberate, almost urgent. The way it would stop when he stopped, move when he moved, felt less like the random movements of a stray and more like the calculated actions of a messenger. James had spent 15 years on the force, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was to trust his instincts. When he finally knelt down to examine the dog more closely, he noticed the collar beneath all that matted fur. It was worn and dirty, but there was something else, a piece of paper carefully folded and tucked beneath the leather. With gentle fingers, he extracted the note, his heart beginning to race as he unfolded the crumpled paper to reveal trembling handwriting. "Help, my brother is sick, no food, no water, food." Apartment 3B. The exhaustion that had been weighing him down moments before evaporated instantly. The dog wasn't lost. It was on a mission. James looked at the small creature, who now sat watching him with an intensity that seemed to confirm the gravity of the situation. "Show me," he said softly, and as if understanding perfectly, the dog turned and began trotting down the street, occasionally looking back to ensure James was following. They made their way through the quiet streets until they reached a dilapidated apartment building. The windows were patched with cardboard, and the security door hung broken on its hinges. The smell of mold and neglect permeated the air, making James's nose wrinkle as they entered. The stairs creaked ominously under his feet as he followed his four-legged guide to the third floor. When they reached apartment 3B, James knocked firmly on the door, calling out to anyone who might be inside. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft whimpers of the dog, who was now pawing desperately at the base of the door. James tried the handle, locked. The dog's distress was growing more apparent by the second, its claws scratching against the wood with increasing urgency. Using his training and authority, James managed to gain entry to the apartment. The smell hit him first, the unmistakable odor of spoiled food and neglect. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw them, two small figures huddled in the corner of the room. A young boy, no more than 7 or 8, cradling a baby wrapped in dirty blankets. The older child's eyes were wide, with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. His face gaunt from hunger, but his grip on his baby brother remaining fierce and protective. The apartment told its own story of abandonment. Empty cupboards stood open, their bare shelves a testament to desperate times. An expired milk carton lay on its side in the unplugged refrigerator. The mattress in the corner was too thin to provide any real comfort, and beside it, a broken crib spoke volumes about the precarious existence these children had been enduring. Among the scattered papers on the floor, James found a hastily scribbled note. "Can't do it anymore. Going to get help and come back. Take care of your brother. Be strong." But the layer of dust on the paper suggested no one had come back for quite some time. The little dog, their desperate messenger, pressed against the older boy's leg, and for the first time, the child's expression softened slightly. James knelt down slowly, keeping his movements careful and deliberate, not wanting to frighten them further. "My name is Officer Anderson," he said gently, "but you can call me James. I'm here to help." Chapter 2. Trust in Small Steps. If this story touched your heart, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. James knew that every second counted. The baby's skin felt hot to the touch, and the older boy, who eventually whispered that his name was Noah, hadn't let go of his brother's tiny hand even once. At the emergency room, James faced the usual bureaucratic hurdles, but his badge and determined expression helped expedite the process. Little Lucas, as Noah finally revealed his brother's name to be, was severely dehydrated and running a dangerous fever. Throughout the entire ordeal, Noah remained silent, his fingers tightly gripping James's jacket sleeve as if it were a lifeline. His eyes darted constantly between his brother being treated by the medical staff and the hospital room's door, as though mapping escape routes. The social worker, Ms. Thompson, arrived quickly, her face a mixture of concern and professional detachment as she assessed the situation. "Officer Anderson," she began, her voice measured and careful, "while your initiative is commendable, we need to discuss proper placement options for these children. Do you understand the complexity of this situation?" James looked at Noah, who had pressed himself closer to his side at the word placement. The boy's entire body had tensed, and his eyes held a look that no child should ever have to wear. The look of someone who had learned too early that adults could disappear at any moment. "I understand the complexity perfectly, Ms. Thompson," James replied, his voice firm but gentle. "I also understand that right now, these boys need stability more than they need another transition. I have a spare room, a secure job, and I'm willing to take the necessary steps to provide them with a safe home." Ms. Thompson's skepticism was evident in her raised eyebrow. "And you're prepared for the challenges of caring for two traumatized children, the sleepless nights, the behavioral issues, the emotional outbursts. This isn't a decision to be made in the heat of the moment, Officer Anderson." Before James could respond, Noah's small voice broke through the tension. "Hero trusts him." Both adults turned to look at the boy, who was staring at the floor but continued speaking. "Hero never trusts bad people. He knew Officer Anderson would help us." The little dog, who had somehow managed to slip past hospital security, sat quietly by Noah's feet, his intelligent eyes moving between the humans as if following the conversation. Ms. Thompson's expression softened slightly as she watched the boy unconsciously lean closer to James. "We'll need to conduct home visits," she said finally. "There will be background checks, interviews, training sessions. This won't be a simple process, Officer Anderson." "I understand," James replied, his hand resting protectively on Noah's shoulder. "And I'm prepared for all of it." The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. James took emergency leave from work to focus on setting up his home for the children. The spare room, which had been serving as storage space, was transformed into a bedroom with 2 beds, though Noah seemed reluctant to sleep in his, preferring to curl up on the floor next to his brother's crib. Hero, now cleaned and wearing a new collar, became Noah's constant shadow. The dog seemed to understand his role as protector and comfort giver, staying close to the boy during his frequent nightmares and serving as a bridge between Noah and the world around him. James watched as Noah methodically checked every window and door in the house multiple times a day, noting how the boy squirreled away food in his pockets when he thought no one was looking. Each meal was approached with a mixture of desperation and restraint, as if Noah couldn't quite believe the food wouldn't disappear. Lucas, recovering his strength daily, became more animated, his baby giggles bringing rare smiles to his brother's face. But the shadows of their past lingered. When James had to return to work, Noah's anxiety spiked visibly. Even with a trusted neighbor checking in on them regularly, the boy would stand by the window for hours, waiting for James's patrol car to appear in the driveway. The first day of school brought its own challenges. Noah sat rigid at his desk, avoiding eye contact with his classmates and flinching at sudden movements. During recess, he positioned himself against the wall, Hero sitting faithfully at his feet. The school had made a special exception after James explained the dog's importance to Noah's sense of security. When a well-meaning teacher tried to encourage him to join the other children, Noah's response was to curl into himself, becoming almost invisible, a skill he had clearly perfected over time. Chapter 3: Shadows of the Past. As autumn deepened into winter, James began piecing together the fragments of the boy's past. Each discovery felt like opening another wound, revealing a pattern of instability that made his heart ache. Previous addresses, incomplete school records, and concerned neighbors' reports painted a picture of a family constantly on the move, always one step ahead of intervention. The boy's mother, Sarah Mitchell, had a history of leaving her children with various relatives and acquaintances, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. Each time, she would return with promises and tears, only to disappear again when the weight of responsibility became too heavy. Their father had never been in the picture, just a blank space on both birth certificates. One evening, as James was reviewing these findings at his kitchen table, his phone buzzed with an anonymous call. The voice on the other end was hesitant, feminine. Are they okay?" Before he could respond, the line went dead. The incident left him unsettled, especially when Hero, who had been dozing by Noah's feet, suddenly perked up his ears and ran to the window, whining softly. The next day, James noticed a woman watching the school from across the street. She wore a worn jean jacket and kept her head down, but her attention was clearly focused on the playground, where Noah sat with Hero. When James approached, she hurried away, leaving behind only the echo of hurried footsteps and the lingering scent of a familiar perfume, the same scent that still clung to Lucas's baby blanket. Noah's teacher, Ms. Martinez, called James in for a conference. "He's incredibly bright," she explained, showing James a collection of Noah's work. "His math skills are well above grade level, and his writing shows remarkable depth for his age. But..." She hesitated, sliding forward a drawing Noah had made during art class. It showed a small figure curled protectively around a baby, while a larger figure walked away into darkness. The details were haunting in their precision. "He needs professional help processing his trauma, Ms. Martinez suggested gently. "And I think you might too, James. Taking on 2 children, especially with their history. It's a lot for anyone to handle alone." James knew she was right. He'd noticed how his own sleep had become lighter, how he found himself checking on the boys multiple times each night, how his heart would race whenever Noah was quiet for too long. The weight of responsibility was immense, but it wasn't the burden that worried him. It was the fear of failing these children who had already been failed by so many others. Hero's sudden disappearance one afternoon sent everyone into a panic. Noah became nearly catatonic, his eyes wide and unseeing, while Lucas cried inconsolably, as if sensing his brother's distress. James organized a search party, but before they could begin, Hero returned on his own, carrying something in his mouth. An envelope, slightly damp but intact. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting. "I've changed. I'm better now. I just want to see them, just once. Please." The paper carried the same perfume James had noticed outside the school. Noah, who had been reading over his shoulder, began to tremble, his small hands clenching into fists. That night, Noah had his worst nightmare yet. James found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m., methodically going through all the cupboards, counting and recounting the food supplies. When James tried to guide him back to bed, Noah burst into tears, the first time he had truly cried since arriving. "She always said that," he whispered, his voice raw. "Always said she was better. But then the food would start disappearing, and then the lights would go out, and then..." He couldn't continue, but he didn't need to. James understood. Lucas, despite his young age, seemed to pick up on the tension. The usually cheerful baby became fussy, only calming when Noah sang to him soft lullabies in a mix of English and Spanish that their grandmother had taught them before she became too ill to care for them anymore. It was the first time Noah had mentioned any other family member. As James tucked Noah into bed that night, though he knew the boy would eventually migrate to his usual spot on the floor, he noticed something new. Among the food Noah had hidden in his pockets was a carefully wrapped cookie, not for himself, but saved for Lucas, a big brother's instinct to protect still running deep. The sight made James's throat tight with emotion, understanding that trust would come in small steps, measured in saved cookies and half-shared stories. Chapter 4. Breaking Points. The confrontation happened on an unseasonably warm Saturday at Jefferson Park. Noah had been making tentative progress, even agreeing to join a small reading group at school, when everything changed. He was watching Lucas attempt his first wobbly steps on the grass, Hero vigilantly circling the baby, when his entire body suddenly went rigid. Across the playground, a woman stood partially hidden behind an old oak tree. Her clothes were clean but worn, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Even from a distance, the resemblance to Noah was unmistakable. Sarah Mitchell had finally decided to make her move. James, who had been watching both children like a hawk since the anonymous call, immediately positioned himself between the woman and his boys. Hero's fur stood on end as he moved to Noah's side, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Noah," Sarah's voice cracked as she took a step forward. "Baby, I've missed you so much." "Both of you." Her eyes were clear, her movements steady, different from the shaking woman described in previous reports. She held out her hands imploringly. "I'm better now. I've been getting help. I have a job, a new apartment." But Noah wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on her hands, specifically on her wrists where familiar bracelets jangled. The same bracelets she'd pawned 6 months ago for drug money, promising she'd come back the next day. They'd run out of food 3 days later. "You're wearing Abuela's bracelets." Noah's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the park's ambient noise like a knife. "You said you sold them for food money." His small hands clenched into fists. "You lied." Sarah flinched as if she'd been struck. "I can explain, honey. I was sick then, but I'm better now. I got them back. I can get everything back. We can be a family again." Lucas, sensing the tension, began to whimper. Noah instinctively pulled his brother closer, and James noticed how the boy's shoulders squared, the same protective stance he'd had the night they first met. "No," Noah said, his voice stronger now. "You always say that. Always. But you're wearing the bracelets, and your nails are done, and..." His voice caught. "And you still haven't asked why Lucas was sick. You haven't asked about school or Hero or anything about us. You just want... I want my children back." Sarah's voice rose, drawing attention from other park-goers. "I'm their mother. You can't keep them from me." She took another step forward, but Hero moved between her and the boys, his protective instinct unmistakable. James remained calm but firm. "Ms. Mitchell, I have temporary custody of Noah and Lucas through the proper legal channels. If you'd like to discuss visitation rights, we can do that through the appropriate authorities." "Authorities?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Like you? Playing hero? Swooping in to save the day? You don't know anything about us, about what we've been through." "He knows." Noah's voice was quiet but clear. "He knows I like strawberry milk but not regular milk. He knows Lucas needs his stuffed elephant to sleep. He knows I'm scared of thunderstorms but pretend I'm not because it makes Lucas cry." Each word seemed to hit Sarah like a physical blow. "He knows because he asks. He stays. He doesn't just promise." Sarah's face crumpled. "Noah, please. I'm your mother. I love you." "Love isn't enough," Noah replied, repeating words he'd clearly heard from adults in his life. "Actions matter more than words. That's what Miss Thompson says in therapy." The mention of therapy seemed to break something in Sarah. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "You've turned them against me," she accused James. "You and your perfect house, and your perfect job, and your perfect life. You think you can just replace me?" But as she moved forward aggressively, Hero's warning growl grew louder, and several nearby parents were already reaching for their phones. Sarah stopped, her eyes darting between the dog, the gathering crowd, and her children's faces. In Noah's unflinching gaze, she saw something that made her step back. Recognition. He knew this pattern too well. The promises, the excuses, the anger when things didn't go her way. Chapter 5. Healing Waters. The days following the park confrontation brought unexpected changes in Noah. The carefully constructed walls he had built around himself began to show cracks, but not in the way James had feared. Instead of retreating further into his protective shell, Noah started to open up, as if naming his fears had somehow diminished their power. During their next session with Dr. Rivera, the child psychologist, Noah spoke more than he had in all previous visits combined. He talked about the good memories too, how his mother used to sing Spanish lullabies when she was having her bright days, how she taught him to make paper boats and sail them in rain puddles. But he also spoke about the dark times, the empty refrigerator, the strangers in their apartment, the promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. "Sometimes," Noah confessed, his fingers buried in Hero's fur, "I wish I could stop loving her. It would hurt less." The raw honesty of his words filled the room with a heavy silence. Dr. Rivera leaned forward gently. "Love is complicated, Noah. It's okay to love someone and still be angry with them. It's okay to love someone and choose to keep yourself safe from them." James, sitting quietly in the corner of the therapy room, felt his heart constrict. He'd seen this struggle play out in Noah's eyes every night when he checked under the bed for monsters, both imaginary and real. The boy was carrying a weight no child should have to bear, the responsibility of loving someone who had repeatedly proven unreliable. Lucas, now toddling confidently with Hero's patient guidance, seemed to sense the shifting emotional tides in their home. He had started reaching for James in the mornings, calling him Dada, with the pure, uncomplicated love of a child too young to remember abandonment. Each time it happened, Noah would watch intently, as if trying to gauge whether this too would be temporary. One evening, as James was preparing dinner, he found Noah sitting at the kitchen table, carefully arranging old photographs he'd kept hidden in his backpack. There were pictures of Sarah in better times, holding a newborn Lucas, smiling at the camera with clear eyes and steady hands. Noah touched them gently, almost reverently. "She wasn't always," he started, then stopped, struggling to find the words. "Sometimes she was really good at being a mom, like really, really good." He looked up at James, his eyes swimming with confusion. "Is it okay that I still want her to get better, even if I don't want to live with her anymore?" James pulled up a chair beside him, taking time to choose his words carefully. "Of course it's okay. You can hope for her healing while still protecting yourself. That's not being selfish, that's being wise." The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, and the anticipation filled their home with a nervous energy. Ms. Thompson had been making regular visits, documenting Noah's progress in school, Lucas's developmental milestones, and the stable environment James had created. Her reports were overwhelmingly positive, but the final decision still loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Hero, ever attuned to the emotional climate of the house, had taken to sleeping in the hallway between the boys' room and James's, as if standing guard against uncertainty itself. The dog's unwavering loyalty had become a symbol of the kind of love Noah was slowly learning to trust, consistent, protective, and unconditional. During their final home visit before the hearing, Ms. Thompson watched as Noah helped Lucas with his blocks, patiently showing his brother how to stack them higher without falling. The scene was ordinary in its domesticity, but extraordinary in what it represented. A child finally feeling secure enough to be a child again. "You know, Ms. Thompson said quietly to James, when you first insisted on taking them both, I thought you were being impulsively noble. I've seen too many well-meaning people overwhelmed by the reality of trauma." She paused, watching Noah laugh at Lucas's attempt to get Hero to balance a block on his nose. "But you've given them something they've never had before, not just stability, but the chance to heal at their own pace." That night, for the first time since coming to live with James, Noah chose to sleep in his bed instead of on the floor. It was a small change that spoke volumes about the trust he was building, not just in James, but in the possibility of permanence itself. As James tucked him in, Noah held onto his hand for a moment longer than usual. Chapter 6. Full Circle. The morning of the custody hearing dawned bright and clear, the kind of autumn day that painted the world in shades of gold and promise. Noah stood before his mirror, carefully straightening the tie James had taught him to knot the night before. His reflection showed a different boy than the one who had sent a desperate message through a stray dog all those months ago. His cheeks were fuller, his eyes brighter, though still carrying wisdom beyond his years. In the kitchen, James prepared breakfast, while Lucas babbled happily in his high chair, occasionally tossing bits of waffle to an ever-patient Hero. The scene was so normal, so precious in its mundane beauty, that James had to take a moment to steady himself against the counter. Everything they'd built together hung in the balance of today's decision. The courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps well-worn by countless stories of lives changed within its walls. Noah gripped James's hand tightly as they climbed, Hero padding faithfully beside them. Ms. Thompson met them at the entrance, her professional demeanor softened by a gentle smile for the boys. Inside the courtroom, Sarah sat with her attorney, looking almost unrecognizable in a press suit and subtle makeup. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged and rearranged the papers before her, but her eyes were clear and focused. When Noah entered, she didn't try to approach or call out. Progress of a different kind. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair, reviewed the case files carefully before addressing the room. She spoke to each party, to Sarah about her recent progress in rehabilitation, to James about his commitment to the boys, to Ms. Thompson about her observations and recommendations, but most importantly, she spoke to Noah. "Young man," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I understand you have something you'd like to say to the court." Noah stood, his small frame straight and determined. The room fell silent, waiting. Hero pressed against his leg, offering silent support, and James saw Sarah brush away a tear as she noticed this interaction, perhaps finally understanding what her children had needed all along. "I want to stay with James," Noah said, his voice clear and steady. "He's not perfect. Sometimes he burns the toast, and he can't sing lullabies in Spanish like Mom, and he's really bad at drawing." A ripple of gentle laughter broke the tension in the room. "But he tries. He tries every day. He never gives up, even when I'm scared or angry. He learns Spanish words from my flashcards so he can help me with homework. He learned how to braid Lucas's hair from watching YouTube videos." Noah paused, gathering his courage for what came next. "I love my mum. I want her to get better. But we need... He looked at Lucas, who was contentedly playing with James's tie, completely trusting in his surroundings. "We need somewhere safe to grow up. Somewhere where promises don't break." The judge's decision, when it came, felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. James was granted full custody, with Sarah allowed supervised visits contingent on her continued progress in rehabilitation. As the judge explained the terms, Sarah stood up, her voice thick with emotion but controlled. "Your Honor," she said, I support this decision. My children deserve stability. They deserve someone who can be there every day, not just on good days. She turned to James, years of guilt and gratitude warring in her expression. Thank you for being what they needed when I couldn't be. That evening, as they celebrated with pizza and ice cream in their backyard, Noah watched Lucas chasing fireflies with Hero. James sat beside him on the porch steps, comfortable in their shared silence. The setting sun painted the sky in colors that reminded Noah of his grandmother's favorite serape blanket. James? Noah's voice was thoughtful. Remember when you found Hero's note? Of course, best message I ever received on duty. Did you know right then that you'd want to keep us? James smiled, remembering that night that had changed all their lives. I knew I wanted to help, the wanting to keep you part. That happened every day after, with every smile, every tear, every small victory. Family isn't built in one moment, it's built in thousands of them. Noah nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't have months ago. Like Hero, he chose us too, one day at a time. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their small family gathered closer. Hero laid his head on Noah's lap, his mission long since transformed from messenger to guardian. Lucas dozed in James's arms, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day just like this one, full of love, constancy, and the quiet miracle of belonging. The end. Dear viewers, we hope this story of Noah, Lucas, James, and Hero has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. Their journey reminds us that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the choices we make every day to love, to stay, to try again. If you'd like to experience more stories that explore the complexity of human bonds and the power of unconditional love, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We've created a special playlist of similarly touching narratives that you can find linked in the description below. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps tell us about a special person or pet who changed your life. Your stories matter to us, and we look forward to sharing more heartwarming tales with you tomorrow. Until then, remember that sometimes the greatest acts of love come from the most unexpected messengers.